Today's daf we're going to be learning is Menachot daf Lamed Daled. Today's daf is sponsored by our Gould in loving memory of Art's father Joseph, Yosef ben Shlomo Shabtai Rachel, on his 25th year at Tzai. My father was an ordinary man, extraordinary dignity, decency, and dedication. He loved to watch my brother and I play on the tennis courts directly opposite our living room window. One day he came out and shocked us both with a huge booming topspin forehand. We didn't know he played. I wish we had had more time together. We're going to get started from around the fourth line, Itmar. So now we're talking still about mezuzah, what's obligated in mezuzah, what's not. Lul patuach min habayit la'aliyah. Okay, imagine they had, this isn't so hard to imagine, they had houses that were 2 floors. Okay, we have normally a normal staircase that leads up from the first floor to the second floor. And often different people lived on the top floor and the second floor. So if you have this house with a second floor and you don't have a normal staircase, but you basically have this hole in the floor of the top floor, and you build a stairwell going downstairs to the bottom floor. But the issue is like this. The person downstairs, and also perhaps the person upstairs, doesn't want people coming up and down and just going straight into their house. So what they build is, and more likely for the one downstairs, because more likely the upstairs person is going downstairs to get in and out. So what they would do is they would build sometimes a wall around the stairwell. It was a closed-in stairwell with walls. So that's what we're talking about here. Lul patuach min habayit la'aliyah. So we have this entrance area that goes in from the house to get to the stairwell that leads up to the second floor. Amar Rav Huna, im yesh lo petach echad, if there's one entrance down at the bottom, and that basically just leads up straight to the top with no specific entrance up top, hayav b'mezuzah achat, then there's one mezuzah at the entrance downstairs. Im yesh lo shnei petachim, but if it has two entrance areas, meaning even upstairs, the walls go up and there's an exit, right? The thing I thought that was the closest is, let's say there's some buildings where the elevator opens up into someone's apartment, right? And you have a key to open it up there, something like that. So if there's a door there to get out into the second floor around this stairwell, chayav b'shtei mezuzot. Okay, this is not to say you need a mezuzah on your elevator. Don't think that from what I'm saying. But in terms of imagining what's the reality here, there's something closed that goes all the way up, and in order to get out into the second floor, you have to open a door. So if that's the case, then you need a mezuzah at the bottom as a mezuzah at the top. So Amar Rav Papa shmami nami de Rav Huna, you can infer from what Rav Huna said, hi indrona, which we saw in I think it was in yesterday's daf, de'ile arba'a bave, that has 4 entrances, or you have this big room where people can get in from 4 different entrances into the room. Hayav ba'arba mezuzot. You need mezuzot on each entrance, and that's he gets from the one that needs the entrance from the upstairs, the entrance from the downstairs. You need a mezuzah in both. Same thing with the room that has 4 doors that you can get into. So the Gemara says, Pshita, isn't this obvious that if you have a room with 4 entranceways, of course you're going to need 4 mezuzot? To which the answer, you might have thought, maybe if I'm sorry, afagav de ragil b'chad. I looked back at the wrong line. Even though you're ragil b'chad, even though you normally only use 1 entrance, it still needs a mezuzah on all 4. So now, this raises a big problem based on what we saw in Daf Lamed Gimel, if you remember. So Rashi says, we have a bit of an issue here. Didn't we say on Daf Lamed Gimel, halach achar haragil, you go by the one that you normally go in and out of, right? We had that story with Rebbe. So Rashi suggests 2 ways to distinguish, and this would have important halachic ramifications. But he says, okay, and again, I'm not getting into halacha here, but you will see the issues that come up. I'm in the middle of the avagav de ragil b'chad, on the second line in Rashi there. In that Rashi, I'm skipping a little bit at the beginning. It says, Hanimile kigon trei bave ragil b'chad. The case with Rebbe was there were 2 entrances, and he used only one of them. So it's 2 to 1. Okay, there's basically 2 entrances, and only one is used. So you could say, okay, the second one's really not used so much. Betela idach legabe. So the second one is basically nullified to the first. But tlata legabe chad lo batle. In the first answer of Rashi, he basically says it's a numbers game. 3 or more, right, like 4, like our case, you can't nullify 4 entrances. And it's 1 to the other. You could say, okay, nobody really uses that entrance. We're just going to go with this one. But if you have 4, there's no way, you can't nullify 4 entrances into 1. Lishna Achrina, the second option, he quotes the Shvat of the Gaonim. He says that the one with Rebbe was Eino Asoi Ela Lo Levado, was just for Rebbe himself. And therefore, Rebbe said, look, I don't use this entrance, I use the other. But in a case, for example, with this case with 4 doors, it must have been there were a lot of people in the house that went in and out of those doors. And when there's a lot of people, you can't say, oh, well, nobody ever uses this one. So if it's one person, you could say they never use that door. So it's nullified. But if it's many people using the space, and then Rashi even goes at the end to say that even if at this point nobody uses that door anymore, but since at some point it was used by many people, it's obligated in mezuzah. Okay, so again, depending on how you understand, right? But all the commentaries talk about how there's a big contradiction here between this sugya and the one on the previous daf. Okay, continuing. Amar Amemar. Hi pitcha de akarna. Okay, we're going to have a bit of a disagreement about what exactly this means. An entrance in the corner. Okay, so Rashi explains it's basically like a diagonal entrance. Imagine you have 2 walls meeting at a right angle, and you basically slice off a bit on an angle, like a triangle, make like a triangle cut, and you basically slice off the wall, and you now have 2 side walls with this open diagonal entrance. So that's one option of what it is. Some people think it means something else, but we'll stick with that. That's Rashi's interpretation. Chayab mezuzah, you need a mezuzah. Now, Amalei Rav Ashi Amemar, but it doesn't have, what's it missing? It doesn't really have a doorpost, because what's a doorpost, right? It's usually like an upside down U, right? Or like a chet, okay? But this doesn't have that because it's a diagonal, right, entranceway area. So Amalei, Adi patzim says, what do you mean? Right? So again, if you imagine, again, it's not that this is how they did it, but imagine you cut off on a diagonal from 2 walls, a bit of each wall. Well, you still have the sides of the walls where there was, you still have a sort of door frame here. It's maybe not a typical shape of a door frame, but it's still a door frame. So he says, these are the patzimim, these are the doorposts. So yeah, Rav Papa, ikle lebei Mar Shmuel. I had this funny vision in my head, right? Rav Papa comes to Mar Shmuel's house, and he walks through the door, okay? Chazahu pitcha de lo havale ela patzim echa mismola, va'avida le mezuzah. He walks in. He sees, okay, this is right. Be careful who you invite to your house. So he sees the doorpost and he says, this is weird. This only has a doorpost on the left side and there's a mezuzah. That's weird, right? And he says, right, you would think that's weird too, but what's even weirder is there weren't 2 doorposts, right? It wasn't a complete doorway. It's only a doorpost on one side, on the left. Okay, now what is this exactly? Some people think it's just, right, imagine, like I said before, you cut off right on your right angle there on an angle. This isn't that. Some people say it's basically that you basically are like missing a piece of the wall, like from the corner to the edge, so it doesn't really have anything on the edge. Problem is, it really should have a doorpost there because the edge of the other wall that was cutting in the right angle should still be there. But some people explain that the wall jutted out farther. The wall on the right jutted out much farther, and where the entrance is comes in and just hits into the wall, with like now there's this space. So the right is where the wall is, but it's not a doorpost because it's a wall that's kind of in the middle and it's still going. So maybe because of that, it doesn't really have a proper doorpost on the right. So comes Rav Papa and he says to Mar Shmuel, Amalei Kiman, who are you holding like? Because if you're holding Rabbi Meir, if you're holding like Rabbi Meir, which we're going to see soon, says even if you have 1 doorpost, you need a mezuzah. But he only said that if your doorpost is on the right side, not if your doorpost is on the left. Now, what we have to figure out is, number 1, where do we know that it's only on the right and not on the left? And after we prove that, we're going to say, well, what's Rebbe's opinion? Which I already kind of told you, but we'll see it inside. So Maihi, what is this? Titania, and where do we get that it has to be on the right? Beitecha, okay, al mezuzot beitecha, that's the pasuk, right? The mezuzot of your house. Bi'atcha, they do this drasha, beitecha, bi'atcha, you're coming. So bi'atcha min hayamin, when you come in on the right, that's what we're talking about, meaning it has to be on your right, okay? Atal min hayamin, right? So the mezuzah should be on the yamin, and maybe it should be on your left. Talmud lomar beitecha. No, that's why it says beitecha, to teach you specifically on the right. Okay, no. They want to know my Talmud. Really, how do you get from beitecha to right? Even if you say beitecha is biatcha, the way you come in, what does it mean? The way you come in is on the right? I mean, you come in on both sides. So, I'm a rabbi. Rabbi explains, we're going to have 2 explanations here. Biatcha min hayamin, the way you come in is on the right. What does that mean? When people pick up their feet to walk, they start picking up their right foot first. Shmuel bar Acha, kamei to Rav Papa, mishmei to Rav bar Ula, amar mehacha. So Shmuel bar Acha gives a different reason how we know. Before Rav Papa said in the name of Rav bar Ula, from the following pasuk. How do we know that when you come in, it's on we put it on the right, and the coming in has to do with to the right? Well, he quotes a pasuk of Yehoyada in Sefer Malachim Bet, chapter 12. Vayikach Yehoyada Kohen. Okay, what he did is he put a pushka, a stucco box, in the Beit HaMikdash because he was trying to collect money for upkeep of the temple. He was trying to fix up the temple. At the time, Vayikach Yehoyada Kohen Aron Echad, he took a little closet. Vayikov Chor B'dalto, he made a hole in it. He put it on the right of the altar. Now pay attention. As people come into the house of God. So what do you do? As they come in, he put it on the right. So what do you see? Coming into something connects with going to the right. We just continue with the pasuk, even though we already proved what we needed. And that's where the Kohanim put the money that they collected. So basically what you see is this connection between the word lavo, to come in, and the right. So that's how we get it. So we have two options, either because people step with the right foot first, or because of this pasuk, which shows coming in connects with right. And that's how we know the mezuzah is supposed to be on the right. Now, my Rabbi Yehuda, where do we see Rabbi Yehuda's position that you can have only one mezuzah and be chayav in mezuzah, but then again, it's going to have to be the right, which we already showed. So Ditanya, as it says in a braita, if you have a house with only one doorpost, so Rabbi Meir obligates to a mezuzah and the rabbis exempt. Okay, so again, now back to just remember, we'll see in a minute what's the reason behind the rabbis and Rabbi Meir's position, but we already now finally understand the question he asked him, or maybe you understood before, but comes into the house and he says, what are you doing with a mezuzah here? You only have one doorpost and your doorpost is on the left. Even Rabbi Meir, who says you're supposed to do it with even one doorpost, definitely doesn't say you're supposed to do it on the left. Okay. Now, we're not going to get an answer to this question, by the way. That's his reaction when he comes into his friend's house. So as I said, be wary who you invite to your house. You might not be happy with the criticisms they give you. I mean, this isn't such a bad criticism. At least he had a mezuzah rather than not having a mezuzah, which you can imagine would be worse. Okay, so let's understand now the background of the debate between Rabbi Meir and the rabbis. My time of Rabbanan, mezuzot ktiv. My time of Rabbi Meir, detanya mezuzot. Okay, so now what's the reason for the rabbis? Because it says mezuzot. My time of Rabbi Meir, detanya mezuzot. Okay, this is a little confusing. So what's the rabbi's position? They say it says mezuzot, plural. What's Rabbi Meir's position? It says mezuzot. Okay, now that's weird. Mezuzot is plural. He says one. So remember, plural means two. That's how the rabbis get two doorposts. Shomea ani miut mezuzot shtayim. So I get that miut mezuzot, is two, meaning minimum is two. That's Rabbi Meir. So that really doesn't make sense. Keep going. Kishuomer mezuzot b'parasha shniya. We know it's in Shema in the first section, chapter 5, and then it appears again in chapter 11. Mezuzot. Why does it say it twice? Well, when it says it twice, she'ein talmud lomar, you don't need it the second time. You already said, write it on your, on your houses, on your mezuzot. So have riboy achar riboy ve'en riboy achar riboy ela lema'et. So you have again in another expansion, another two. Well, two, and then if you have another two to say more, well, sometimes if you include more, it actually comes to exclude and bring you back down. So basically it started with two, then it went up, which really brings you down, and that gets you down to one. Bit of a not most convincing drasha in the world, but that's Rabbi Yishmael. Okay, so miyato katuv mezuzah achad. From there we whittled it down to one mezuzah only. Tivrei Rabbi Yishmael. Again, one doorpost. That if you only have one doorpost, you're still obligated a mezuzah. Rabbi Akiva is going to have a different explanation, and basically what they're saying is Rabbi Meir holds either by one or the other, but they're both explaining the same thing. Rabbi Akiva Omer no tzarich, I don't need your drasha. Kishu Omer ala mashkof val shtei mezuzot. This is on Pesach when they're supposed to put it on both of the doorposts. So now it says she'ein talmud lomar. Now you don't need to say two mezuzot because as soon as you say mezuzot, that means two. So ein talmud lomar shtei, ma talmud lomar shtei. So why did they say two? Ze bana'av. This created a paradigm to teach you. Kol makom shneimar mezuzot eino ela echad. Anytime it says mezuzot, it's one. unless it says two. Okay, we've seen this before in different things. Eid echad, right? The eid means two unless it says one. In this case, it's the opposite. Mezuzot means one unless it says two. Okay, now we have Tanu Rabbanan, new braita. Now we're going to talk about writing the mezuzah on a cloth. Now, again, this is a good example of things that we completely take for granted. And we're going to see, it doesn't necessarily match the simple reading, and how did they get to that? So, Tanu Rabbanan, uchtaftam, yachol yichtevena alavanim. Okay, you should write them. Now, you might have thought you write it on stones, meaning on the wall, on the stone wall, on the doorpost. It says, write it on the mezuzot of your houses. That sounds pretty clear, actually. Much more intuitive, write it on the doorpost. But wait, it says here, writing. And it says somewhere else, writing. Malahalan ala sefer. Just like writing there is on a book. Avkan ala sefer. Also here, it's on a book. Does this mean it's on a book? What do we mean? Where's there? So good question. Rashi says by get. It says v'katav las sefer krichut. He writes her a book of divorce. Okay, so it has to be written on a parchment. Tessa says, no way could you say that, because actually there's a Mishnah in Gittin that it could be written on a leaf of an olive branch. Okay, a leaf from an olive tree. It could be written on the horn of a cow. So you don't actually need it to write in a book, and they actually explain sefer there to be sefer sipur dvarim. You have to explain what's happening. The guy has to say, she is now permitted to everybody else. You have to say it in words. Okay, but write it in words, but it doesn't have to be written on parchment. So that's not a good example. So Tosafot brings two other possibilities, either in the sota, where they write down the curses, or in where the commandment for the king to write a sefer Torah. Okay, so he suggests maybe that's what it is. So anyway, a machlok at where we learned this Gzera Shava from. Then it says here, so again, now we start off by saying we should write it on stones. Then they say, no, it says ktiva, Gzera Shava, we're going to learn it from there. So now the braita continues and says, o kalech l'derech zo. Maybe it goes the other way. Ne'amar kan ktiva v'ne'amar lahalan ktiva. It says there, writing. And it also says somewhere else writing. Now we're going to see that there's a different place where you actually write on stones. Malahalan alavanim, avkan alavanim. Just like their writing is on stones, also here writing is on stones. So maybe it is really to write on stones. Where is that? At the end of Sefer Dvarim, God tells Moshe to tell the people when they get to the land, v'kafta, actually, can't remember now if God commands it or if Moshe says it, but either which way, it says in Dvarim chapter 27, v'katafta ala avanim. I'll actually open it up and I'll look exactly so we can know. Okay, but it says v'katafta ala avanim et kol divrei haTorah hazot. So you're supposed to write when you get there. You're supposed to write on the stones, and this actually Yehoshua does. Okay, so here it says it. Sorry, one second. Kapsayin, Vaitzav Moshe v'Ziknei Yisrael. Yeah, it's just Moshe. It doesn't say God commanded him, it's just Moshe. Moshe tells them, I want you to write the Torah on stones. So maybe it is really on stones. So now they say, no, because near Elami Domen. Well, which one is it more similar to? We should learn something that's continual from something that continues throughout the generations. But we're not going to learn it from something. That was a one-time thing. We're not going to learn it from writing that was a one-time thing. That doesn't make any sense. And now we're going to learn something from another pasuk. There's a pasuk from Yirmiyahu, where Yirmiyahu tells the scribe Baruch, he says to him, Baruch says to him, Mipiv yikra elai et hadvarim ha'ele, v'ani kotev ala sefer b'dio. So Baruch says to them, you tell me what to write, and I'm going to write it on the book with ink. So what do you see here? That you need to use dio. Dio is black ink, okay, the black ink of their time. Anyway, it has to be written in black. Okay, and that's what we learn from here, because it also says ktiva. Now the Gemara asks a good question, or Rav Acha. Amalei Rav Acha b'rei de Rav Ashi. Rachmana amar al mezuzot. Va'at amar nelech ktiva. The Torah says write it on the doorpost, right? We think always mezuzah is the mezuzah, because we're used to that. But the mezuzah is really the doorpost. The Torah says write it on the doorpost. And then you're going to bring this Gzera Shava that says ktiva. Oh, ktiva means write it on a parchment, so it must mean write it on a parchment. That's ridiculous. You don't have Gzera Shava that takes something away from the simple meaning of the pasuk. So he says, Amar Kra, Uchtaftam, Ktivatamas. So first they darshan this Uchtaftam. It has to be a complete writing. V'hadar ala mezuzot. Okay, what they say is This is a writing. First you write it, then uchtav tam, write your ktivat tamah, and then al mezuzot, then put it on the door. So that's how they read the pasuk, and then it fits in with the simple reading, because simple reading is write it and then put it on the mezuzah. Well, then what are you going to do with the gzera shava? We know there was the gzera shava, but ktiva. So what are you going to learn from it if you're not going to learn the whole idea that has to be written on parchment from there, because we just darshaned it from a different way. So ilav gzera shava havamina lichteva avna v'likba asipa kamashmalan. Without the gzera shava, you might have thought write it on stones and put the stones up on the doorpost. Therefore, they needed to tell you no. If the ktiva comes to teach you, it goes on parchment. Okay, that finishes the mezuzah section. Maybe we'll do our review right now, which is we started with the doors, right? The stairwell that had walls around it with entrances, and you need a mezuzah in both places. From there, we got to the four-sided room that needs from all ends. We discussed the contradiction between the earlier sugya. We went to the diagonal wall, the diagonal entrance, and the person who had only one entrance, and he put it on this left side, because that was where he had his entrance, and the Rav Papa came in and said, what are you doing here? This doesn't match any real opinion. And then we got to, through that, this machlok of Rabbi Meir and the rabbis about whether you need two doorposts or only one. And from there, we got to about writing it. And how do you know that you write it on a parchment? And that it should be specifically parchment and also written on something and then put on the wall and not directly written on the wall. Okay, now we're going to go to tefillin. Okay, before we start, I'll just show you for those who are not as familiar with tefillin, since many of us are women and most of us are not wearing tefillin, so we're not as familiar with what they look like and the details of them. So now we're going to start learning all about tefillin. So this is the tefillin shel rosh. Let's start with that. It has 4 compartments. They're called arba'a batim, 4 sections. Okay, you can see the lines, okay, both on the sides and on the top. You can see maybe it's not so good in my screen, but you can see there's lines here that basically show you. We're going to get into that today, why we have those. Inside are 4 sections. Okay, we're going to learn today how they make the sections. They're little, okay, there's very short klafim, okay, they're long-ish, but in each of them, there's 4 sections from the Torah that each relate to tefillin, the 4 times tefillin is mentioned in the Torah, 2 in Shmot Yud Gimel, Vayakiv Yacha, and Kadesh Li is actually first, that's the beginning of chapter 13 in Shmot, and in the continuation, starting from chapter 11, Pasuk 11, in that same chapter is Vayakiv Yacha, when God brings you to the land, and both of them mention the idea of tefillin. Then we have Shema, which has tefillin in it. Okay, that's a lot shorter, you can see. And Vayayim Shema. Okay. Sorry, this one is Vayayim Shema. Okay, so, no, sorry, the longest one actually is Vayayim Shema. Okay, so before I showed you here, this is Kadesh Li. Okay, and that's about the Bechor, the firstborn, and from there they get into tefillin, and this is Vayakiv Yacha. Okay, so these are 4. You can see they're all folded. They get folded up. And they get put in, there's 4 kind of slots in here. Okay, here you can see it's sewn with a piece of leather, but inside there's basically 4 compartments, and they each go in the 4 compartments. We're going to talk about the order of that today. Famous machloket Rabbeinu Tam and Rashi. The tefillin shel yad is very different. The tefillin shel yad is 1 box inside. It's all 1 section, 1 compartment. You can see there's no lines over here. It's all smooth, and it has 1 very long parchment, which you can see has divisions between 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, and there are the 4 sections. Okay, and they're in the order of the way they appear in the Torah. Okay, starts with Kadesh, goes to Vayakiv Yacha, Shema, and Vayayim Shema. Okay, more of that later. Now, the Gemara says, Arba parshiyot shebetefillin makvin zotzot. This actually isn't the Gemara, this was the Mishnah. Afilu ktav echa makvan. Even 1 letter out of place is a problem. Okay, what is that, like 1 letter missing? So the Gemara says, Pshita, obviously, if you're missing a letter, it's not going to be good. Well, I'm Rav Yehuda, I'm a Rav. This is the exact same sugya we saw by mezuzah. Lo nitzrucha ele lekotzo shel yud, for that little chupchik on the yud, which again, we weren't sure where it was, different machloket about where exactly, but even if you're missing that little part, it's disqualified, to which the Gemara said, Hanami Pshita, that's also obvious. Everybody knows you need the little cuts on the yud. So, lo nitzrucha ele le'idach to Rav Yehuda was something else Rav Yehuda said, to Amar Rav Yehuda, I'm a Rav. If you don't have, the words aren't surrounded by parchment on all 4 sides, and you have the words blending into each other where two letters are touching, that disqualifies. That finishes Amud Bet. Now we're going, Amud Aleph. Now we're going to Amud Bet. Tanu Rabbanan. litotefet, litotafot. Harekan arba divrei Rabbi Yishmael. Where do we get? We have 4 batim in the tefillin. So they say, well, it says litotefet, okay, there's 3, okay, in the 4 sections it mentions tefillin, but in the first one, it doesn't actually mention the word litotafot. The word litotafot appears in the other 3 sections. Now, according to the Gemara, 2 times it doesn't have a vav, 1 time it has a vav. Okay, it actually has 2 vavs in the other time. According to the Gemara, there's debate about which vav we're concerned with, because totafot, there's 2 vavs in the word, but either which way, it's treated as 1 vav, it's plural. Now, they're all really plural, because it's really totafot, but it's spelled as if it's singular, litotefet. So 1 and 1, both are singular, that's 2, and the plural one counts as 2, so altogether you have 4. The problem is that by us in our Torah, one of the other mentions, okay, the one in Dvarim Yud Aleph, okay, which, right, that's the one, Totafot. Yeah, both in Shmot Yud Gimel, Pasuk Tet Zayin, and also in Dvarim Yud Aleph, Pasuk Yud Chet. Both of those have a vav in it, so there's a bit of an issue. The Ran says we should actually fix our Sifrei Torah based on what the Gemara says. Other commentaries strongly disagree and say, look, this is the tradition we have. We go with what our Torahs say right now, and we're not going to start changing our Torahs. But it was clear that there was a different version in front of the rabbis of the Gemara. But that's how Rabbi Yishmael gets 4 batim. Rabbi Akiva, Omer no tzarich. You don't need to start darshaning the vavs and whether there is a vav, isn't a vav. But tat b'katpi shtayim, pat b'Afriki shtayim. These are 2 different languages. Tat in one language is 2, and pat in a different language is 2. And from there you get to 4. This is a puzzling, okay? They're actually both puzzling because Rabbi Yishmael doesn't actually match our text that we have. And Rabbi Akiva's is surprising because he's using words from a different language and saying that the Torah is taking a word litotafot and using, it's a combo of 2 different words from some other language. Now, some of the commentators try to respond to this by saying, well, maybe it was in those languages because those languages were influenced by the Hebrew language, and this just is helping us understand. By now we see these other languages, we don't recognize this word anymore, but maybe those languages are based on the Hebrew language. Anyway, it raises a lot of questions. What exactly, what kind of drasha is this? Okay, Tanu Rabbanan. In any case, everybody agrees that it's 4 batim. Nobody has any disagreement about this, even though there is a bit of a disagreement about the source for it. Tanu Rabbanan. This is a good classic example of they knew the halacha and they were just trying to connect it to something, to have it so people could remember, so people could identify it, connect with it. Tanu Rabbanan. Now we have another braita, and this one's going to talk about how you make the tefillin. You might have thought you write them on 4 different klafim, which you do. We're talking about the tefillin of rosh. Now you might have thought that you form the tefillin from 4 different hides, and each box is made from a different hide. Okay, unfortunately in this tefillin it's sealed. I mean, that's most tefillin. We can't see inside and see the batim inside, but we're going to explain how they're made. Talmud lomar lezikaron beinecha zikaron echad amarti lecha velo shnayim shlosha zikaronot. It says this should be a zikaron. This is the pasuk that doesn't talk about the totafot. It says it should be a reminder between your eyes. 1 reminder and not 2 or 3. So basically the 4 batim, as they call them, which literally translates houses, but 4 areas where we house the tefillin are really made of 1. Okay, because it's all 1 zikaron, 1 remembrance. Ha-ketzad, so how do you do it? How do you make 4 batim out of 1 piece of leather? Kotvan arba'a orot, you write it on 4, okay, so first it's a little confusing. We're talking about the hide that we use, the parchment, for the drawing, for the writing of the words. So you write them on 4 different pieces of leather, of, parchment. Umenichan ba'arba'a batim be'or echad. And you put it in 4 batim that are all made from 1 piece of leather. Okay, the way you do that is there's a mold and you put the leather over the mold and it dries in the form of the 4 batim. Now, if you ended up writing the whole parchment on 1 piece of parchment and put it into the 4 batim, you could do that. Okay, we're going to have a little debate about exactly how you do it, and it's not 100% clear exactly how this works. Okay, we don't do this really, but we do it in 4, like I showed you. But if you were to do it, you could do it as long as you leave some space in between each one, because you're basically going to put 1 in 1 and then have it come out and then go into the other. So you need the space to be able to be the in-between space. so that you can get it into each of the batim. Chachamim omrim eino tzarich, they think it can be done without leaving that space. V'shavim, but they both agree shenoten chut o meshicha ben kol achat ve'echad. We want to make sure you have a clear separation between each of the sections. Some people think this is in any case. Some people say this is only specifically in the case where you did it all on one parchment, because if you didn't do it on one parchment, they're already separated. But some people say you need this anyway, where you need to bring this thread, and this is, I believe this is done now, where there's some sort of thread that goes in between them to kind of separate between the different sections. Even though the hide itself inside separates, some people think that maybe we're talking about as it juts down below where the hide is, and then they might connect a little bit, and therefore we want to keep them separate. Again, the reality of all this is a little bit unclear what they mean. Another thing is you have to see the indentation here, okay, to see that this is made of different sections. The tefillin of rosh needs to look different from the tefillin shel yad. The one on your head needs to look different from the one on your hands. The one, as we saw, the one in your hand, your arm, is smooth. The one on your head has the different sections, so you have to be able to see that from the outside. Tanu Rabbanan, another braita. Ketzad kotvan, how do you write them? So tefillah shel yad kotva al or echad, as we said before. The tefillin for your arm needs to be on one long cloth. Im ktava ba'arba orot, if you wrote it on 4 different cloths, v'inicha bebayit echad, now we're in the reverse. Before we talked about what if you wrote it on 1 when you're supposed to write it on 4, what if you wrote it on 4 when you're supposed to write it on 1? So according to the first opinion, sarich lidabek, you need to glue them together or stick them together. They need to be as one. It's supposed to be a sign on your hands. Just like it's supposed to be a sign, just like on the outside it's a sign. You can see it's just one, right? It's very noticeably different from the other one. Also, on the inside, it's supposed to be a sign. Derives Rabbi Yehuda, meaning the inside has to look like the outside, even though you only see it on the outside, but the inside has to look the same, where it's all one, so you have to stick them together. That's all Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yossi Omer no tzarich. Rabbi Yossi says you don't need that. Aber Rabbi Yossi umodeli Rabbi Yehuda beRabbi shem ein lo tefillin shel yad veyesh lo shnei tefillin shel rosh shetole or al echad mehem umenicha. So that's this very strange line, because Rabbi Yossi says, but you know what? Rabbi Yehuda says has to look on the inside the same way it does on the outside. But he agrees with me that if you only had 2 tefillin of rosh, what would you do? Even though it's separated on the inside, you put one piece of hide over the top to cover up the fact that it looks like it's separate sections. And as long as on the outside it looks like one, that's fine. And Rabbi Yehuda will even agree with me about that. So the Gemara says, how could you possibly say this? Modeh, hainu plugtayu, that's exactly what their disagreement is about. Their whole disagreement is, do you have to stick them together on the inside where you don't see it anyway? And Rabbi Yehuda says you do. So how could he possibly say that you can have it in 4 separate sections and yet use it as a tefillin shel yad? So Amar Rava midvarav shel Rabbi Yossi chazar bo Rabbi Yehuda. Rava says from here you can see that Rabbi Yehuda changed his mind. Okay, Rabbi Yossi, I guess, convinced Rabbi Yehuda to change his mind. And Rabbi Yehuda said in the end it doesn't need to be all one inside. And therefore what Rabbi Yossi is saying is in the end he agreed with me that you could just cover up a tefillin shel rosh, because as long as it looks like a tefillin shel yad on the outside, it's fine. To which the Gemara says, Ini, that can't be true. Because listen to this. If they all end up agreeing in the end, then this thing that we're going to hear right now doesn't go with any position. Because you're going to see that somebody needs it. Okay, it's going to look like somebody doesn't like using a tefillin shel rosh for your yad, presumably because they're not all one section inside. So, and then how could it be that Rabbi Yehuda agreed with Rabbi Yossi that that's not an issue? So, Hashalach Rav Hananya Mishmei to Rabbi Yochanan. Okay, Rav Hananya sent in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Tefillah shel yad, again, tefillah means tefillin. Osino tashel rosh. You can use a tefillin shel yad for the rosh. You can use the one for your arm that's all one section. You can use that on your head. V'shel rosh ein osino tashel yad. But you can't use this tefillin shel rosh, which has 4 different sections. You can't use that on your head. Why? The one that goes on your head has much higher sanctity. So you can't you lower that by putting it on your arm. So now they're going to say, right, so it sounds like you can't use tefillin shel rosh for your yad. But what did Rabbi Yossi say? Even Rabbi Yehuda agrees with me that if all you have is tefillin shel rosh, use it on your arm. This says you can't. So now we're going to say, okay, that's not a contradiction. They're talking about 2 different situations. Lo kashya, ha ba'atikata, ha bechadatata. One is with old tefillin, meaning used already. If you used it already for your arm, For your head, you cannot use it on your arm. That's disrespectful. Take something that was used on your head and move it to your arm. Completely disrespectful. You cannot do that. And that's the braita. But if it's new and it's never been used before, and you happen to have 2 boxes of tefillin that are both for the head, you can just cover one of them and use it on your arm. That's okay, because that's not lowering it in respect. It's only if it was already on your head that it's lowering it and being more disrespectful. Ulamanda Amar Hazman Miltihi. Now wait. So, and then Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi can both agree that it's fine to use it as long as it's brand new and never been used before. And then there's no contradiction. But now they say, wait. But some people say that hazmana is something. Meaning, when you decide I'm making a tefillin shel rosh, you intend, right? The sofer makes the tefillin shel rosh with the intent it's going to be used for the head. How can you just change that, right? There are people who say once you designate it one way, that's designated. So how could you possibly take, even if it's brand new, never been used, it should still be a problem to move its designation. To which they say, you must have made a condition from the beginning. The sofer must have made a condition. I'm making this for rosh, but it could potentially be used for the arm as well. Okay, last thing for today. Like I said, we were going to talk about the big famous machloket of Rabbeinu Tam and Rashi. Why is this so famous? Because there's people who wear 2 sets of tefillin, to be yotzei, the tefillin of Rabbeinu Tam and Rashi, okay, to fulfill both positions. So what's the position? What's the debate? It's about what is the order of the 4 parshiot in the tefillin shel rosh. Okay, here's the tefillin shel rosh, like we said, 4 compartments. What's in each one? Tanu Rabbanan, Ketzad Sidran, what's the order? Kadesh li, Vayakiv Yacham Yamin, we're going in chronological order in the Torah. First Shemot 13, verse 1. Vayakiv Yacha, later in that same chapter in 13, Miyamin. So you start on the right, you have first Kadesh, then Vayakiv Yacha, we're going with Rashi first. Shema Vayam Shema Mismol. And then on the left, you have Shema and Vayam Shema. What does it mean on the left? So Rashi says it just means you continue. You have Kadesh, Vayakiv Shema, Vayam Shema, and it's perfectly in order, just like in this long one. That's the exact order. Okay, those are the 4 sections. Also, in this one, it's going to be the same thing in order. So first the Gemara says, V'atani Ebcha, but doesn't it say the reverse? Where it says it's Kadesh li, Vayakiv Yachaz mismol, and Shema and Vayam Shema, or miyamin. So Amar Bai lo kasha kam yimino shel koreh, kam yimino shel miniach. With this, we're going to finish, although we're going to get into Rabbeinu Tam, so we're not going to finish the second, but that's the end of the Gemara for today. He says it all depends who's right. If I'm the one wearing the tefillin, then my right, if someone's facing me, his right is not my right, or her right is not my right. Okay, so if you were to put this tefillin on your head, and someone's facing you, what's right is the one they were talking about in the first braita. To the right of the person. That's why it says hakoreh koreh sidran. Someone who's looking at you. Now we can't read because it's all inside, but if you were to read it, it would be right to left. Okay, so on the right side would be Kadesh, Vayakiv Yacha, and then Shema, Vayam Shema. And the person who it's on their own head, it actually goes from the left, because what's right to the person in front is left to the other person who's on the other side. Okay, that's Rashi. Rabbeinu Tam says, Rashi makes no sense, because if it wanted to say right to left, it would say right, start at the right and go Kadesh, right, Vayakiv Yacha, Shema, Vayam Shema. But it says for the right you have Kadesh and Vayakiv Yacha, and from the left you have Shema and Vayam Shema. So what does he say? The outer one on the left is Shema. So you have Kadesh on the outer side of the right, and you have Shema on the outer side on the left. And then Vayakiv Yacha and Vayam Shema are the 2 middle ones. So he has a different, completely different set. And again, he says, it's still going to be in order, because if you use it in order coming from the outside, in order, first 2, right, start on the right, go to the middle. And then the other 2 start on the left and go to the middle. Okay, and that's them. There's 2 other opinions as well, at least, that I saw of what the order is. Okay, but we're going to stop at Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam. So to review the second part of the daf, we had the 4 parshiot and the tefillin, which are ma'akvot, and then from there we got to what does that mean? The same thing with mezuzah. Really means this issue of the letters can't be knit touching each other. From there we got to where do you get the 4 batim from? Either the totafot, the totafot, or the tot and pat in different languages is 2 each, and from there you got to 4. Then we had how did they make the hide for the 4 compartments, and how are you supposed to write them for each one, and what if you do it differently? Does that work? And from there we got to the machloka between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda, which Rabbi Yossi then claims Rabbi Yehuda went to his side about whether sorry, I'm blanking. Oh, right. Whether you have to put them together. If you write four for the one that's supposed to be one, you write four. Do you have to stick them together? Does it have to be together on the inside as well, or is it enough to be together on the outside? And then we ended with, and then we had some contradiction from braita, but we resolved it. And then we ended with this machloket Rashi Rabbeinu Tam about how the tefillin go inside. What is the order of the parshiot? With that, we finish for today. Wishing everyone a good day and a Shabbat Shalom.